Right? So I hope we get lots of people joining us today.
That would be
Hello,
great.
everyone, and welcome. We are here for the first ever Magic Lad Book Club. Hold on to your kids, why parents need to matter more than peers. We are on part 2, which is titled Sabotaged, How Peer Orientation Undermines Parenting. We have with us today Samantha Moe, founder and creator of the Magic Lad Blueprint. We have Uzma, a Magic Lad mentor and educator. We have Mark, a Magic Lad mentor, also an educator. And we have me, Nikki, also a Magic Lad mentor and educator. You may hear a little bit more about what we offer to the world as we share our thoughts on part 2. Uzma, do you want to start with our fascinating quote?
Sure. As we were delving into chapters 4 through 7, I was reminded that this is a meaty read. This quote stuck out to me, and I'm paraphrasing. The secret of the parent's power is in the dependence of the child. And it was mentioned by the authors, this idea of, we actually are in control and in power. And sometimes that's what causes some of these issues that we see in parenting.
Yeah.
There's so much to unpack in what you just said. When you talk about issues with parenting, I think we'll probably get to that in a little bit. I think what stuck out for me also, kind of as an extension of that fascinating quote, was the idea that when things are in their natural order, where parents are, the hierarchy and children are dependent, that's when things flow naturally and work. But when that kind of gets the other way around, where the children have the power, and I mean power in the way that the book is written, things get wonky, and then other things happen. Like, we start to raise our voice, and we start to, I don't know, make threats, or kind of hold on tighter and try to get our kids to comply, or, things like that. We get dysregulated when things are out of the natural order, and that just causes more people, the kids, and also you, to kind of like, draw the line in the sand, and that's when things get interesting. Yeah. Did any of you guys have anything come up for you while reading part 2, other than the fact that it felt a little repetitive? I'm being honest, it felt a little repetitive.
It was a bit repetitive. I think for me, it's kind of different for me reading this, because things are coming up for me that may not even have much to do with the actual reading of it. It's just, sometimes I read it and I think, okay, not sure what that's about or how that connects to my life. And then I just sit with it for a while, and then something will start popping up, or it's like, oh, okay, that connects there, which is not uncommon, I think, with a lot of different kinds of readings and education. But it was, for me, it's a lot of connecting to my son and what has happened and continues to happen in terms of peers. He puts a great deal of, I'm not even sure what the word is. He thinks that what they say is absolutely right, and that they know, and that we don't, because they're younger than us and they've had more experience in life. And it's like, no, really, I've had experience. It's just been a while ago.
I feel you, Mark.
I think a lot of that came up.
And your son is how old?
21.
21. Wow.
Yep.
I relate to what you said, but I guess I have a little bit of a different take on it, where when I'm reading this book, like I said, I felt it was a little bit repetitive because I just want to get to the good stuff. I'm a parent of 2. I have a 10-year-old and a 15-year-old, and I'm also an educator. I've taught mainly kindergarten to grade 3. And what happens to me sometimes when I read things like this, especially this book, is I'm like, oh, but remember that student that I had? I wonder what was happening at home. And it feels like everything just traces back to those early years. So that came up a lot for me in part one and also in part two. Anything come up for you, Isma, that you wanted to share? Or Samantha?
Go ahead, Samantha.
Oh, sure. Thank you. I was just getting headphones in too, but I'm happy. As I'm reading this, like we talked about in the part one book club, I'm looking at this from the perspective of raising a 2, almost 3-year-old. And in reading part two, I keep having thoughts of like the science of attachment and attachment theory, which a lot of mental health professionals and some educators are familiar with this. And basically it comes back to what happened in really early days with you and your child, or with the caregiver and the child. And I feel a little bit nervous as I'm listening to this guy talk, because in parenting, all of us are really conscientious. Like, we don't just love kids, but we love parents. And the shame and guilt spiral in parenting can take us down pretty quickly. And so when you said I'm waiting for the good stuff, as I'm listening to the author talk about attachment and saying things like you can't just step into parenting simply because a child is dependent and you as a parent are willing to take responsibility. Like, that doesn't make you a parent. You can't just have expectations that your kid's going to listen and put on their shoes and eat food and like be respectful. And it feels a little striking and shocking to me. Like, I agree with that because we all believe in relationship and connection, but I feel a little bit worried about the directness of like, what about parents who we're looking back at early days and we're like, but my kid had a wound of separation at birth. My kid had birth trauma. A parent had a mental health breakdown and got institutionalized. And when that parent, or I think about somebody in my family, the babysitter who cared for the child 30 hours a week, and then at age 1 left abruptly and the child went to school, right? We're all like kind of like scrunching our face.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, that child demonstrated insecurity and attachment for a while. And so that's kind of my take. No, like, what do we do about it? Answers. But just kind of that striking worry on like, where's this going? How is this going to be perceived by people? Are we going to come out of here ahead?
Yeah. So relate to that, Samantha. I'm glad you brought it up, because there was a little feeling, even in part one, of like, are we doing this wrong? Because you as a parent judges yourself and you reflect on even other parent encounters that you've had in your community. And so for me, the authors talked about how the 3 ingredients, of parenting is having a child who needs to be taken care of, and you're like, check. An adult willing to take responsibility, and I'm like, I'm that adult, and then it says a good working attachment. And so even how they talked, this part really kind of got to me and made me think a lot, was do self-help books and parenting can you actually learn techniques and be that effective parent? And they kind of said, no, it's about attachment more than anything. And that was like, oh, well, we're Maté Glad like coaches and mentors, and
And we're reading this book.
And so I have to throw that out there, because as readers, you might think that too, right?
But same as the creator of a curriculum with techniques, I'm like, where's this going? But I also agree that if we're labeling the child and we're like, fix the kid, that doesn't address attachment, because I have like so many things here. Because like positive discipline, whether it's, like the trademarked one or like just a general methodology, it's like, you can't, there's a quote in the book, like, you can't run roughshod with a strategy. Like, you can't run roughshod with discipline. Like, this is a good method if you're not actually relating to the person.
Right.
And so when it comes to like a label, fix my kid, or give me a tool, fix my parenting, it robs us of our natural authority and confidence, which that piece actually gives me hope, because in the coaching field, we do that. because we're not like, I'm expert, slap on the label. But it's like, okay, so let's like understand your kid, understand you, and look at relationship.
Mhm.
Nikki had a great connection, if you want to share it, when we were discussing this offline about the 3 C's and the connection to Mad to Glad.
Right. So Magic Lad talks about the 3 C's, which are calm, connect, and collaborate. And the calm is more about brain regulation. The connect is connecting, obviously, with the parent. And the collaborate is where, almost like the hierarchy of needs, if you're able to regulate yourself, so your brain's okay, you're ready to engage, and you're able to connect with the parent so that attachment is secure, only then are you able to collaborate or participate in the family, in the class if it's in a classroom, in the team if you're part of a team. But if you don't have those basics of calm first and then connect, then you cannot, as a child, be in the right brain frame to be able to collaborate. So that's one of the things, I was also struggling with this, and I'm like, no, I don't think that Mad to Glad is just another how-to approach, because it does address the calm, connect, and collaborate, which is what I think distinguishes it from everything else. So I think the authors are saying the same thing.
Mhm.
And a parent's calm and focus on connection, or in the therapy world, they call it attunement and emotional regulation and validation. Those restore attachment.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Yeah.
One thing that just, I don't know why this didn't occur to me before this. Our son is adopted. And when he came home, we found out very quickly that he had a disease that he needed to have chemo for 5 months. And then right after he finished the chemo, one of his grandparents that was very close to him died. So he, at a very young age, had a lot of attachment breaks. I think
Disruption.
yeah.
Disruption. Mhm.
he was attached to his foster parents, which I think so. I think which was really good. But I remember even when he came to us for, I would say 3 or 4 months, he didn't smile. And he was constantly looking around. And it was like, at one point I said, well, he had his whole world ripped out from under him. Of course he's still hypervigilant, very hypervigilant. So that it kind of makes sense to me, a lot of other things that happened down the line, because it was a disrupted attachment. And that I do think that when he came, we did have this idea that all we needed to do was to be a parent. That was what we did. And I think in some ways that was really good for him, that we did connect with him. But on another level, looking back, I wish I would have had more information prior to adoption.
That's
It also,
interesting.
yeah, it's such a fascinating connection you made, Mark. I just, as I was listening to you, I just thought as well, for professionals who work with children, we have that compassion and passion to serve and want to do right by the child. And that's why we become educators. However, like, a child may not want to be there, right? We see that in the school world. And even if they want to, they come with their own set of their own attachments, their disruptions that we talked about. And like, how powerful for teachers and educators to know this part, like, so we can be more attuned, I guess, right, to what their needs are. And we see this all the time, and positive discipline talks about that too, like going and figuring out why the child is behaving a certain way. But going back to this book, it's really about working on that attachment, whether it's at the parent level, teacher level, grandparent level. All of those matter so much. And so I also want to throw out, like, from chapter 6, they talked about, and they talked about the hierarchy, right? The parent does need to be in charge. And so it made me think about, where does that go in terms of the voice? Like, we want to give voice and choice to the child, but ultimately knowing, and this, going back to this part 1 about peer orientation, like, parents have to kind of stay in charge and be that dominant personality, which is also a little bit of an aha moment for me. Like, oh yeah, we are in charge and we're supposed to be, and it's okay to, because I feel like of late there's been this, I don't know, this sense of like everybody has to have equal footing. And this book says, no, you don't.
So when you say equal footing, you mean, for example, in a household, everybody has the same rights, everybody has the same voice. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, similar. Like, and like I go back to my school world where, teachers they're not the sage on stage, they're the facilitators, they're the guides. And this is like what we encourage for teachers, so that you're not the only one in charge. You need to listen to the children because they have great ideas, and give them that voice and empowerment, which is, of course, everything we want to do. However, Neufeld and Maté remind you in this book that the reason children turn to peer attachment and peer orientation is because somewhere the attachment with the parent has been, weakened.
Mm-hmm. So that kind of reminds me of, like you mentioned, the child's voice and choice. So maybe I'll talk about myself as a parent. Myself and my husband encourage our children to share what's working and what's not working, because that gives the parents who are in authority a chance to step away and see how we can rework how we run our house to be able to address those things that our children have brought up that we were perhaps not aware of, right? So to us, that's child voice. Choice is innate in everything that we do. So, we'll just lump that in there. But I think that that is working in this, the dynamic of the parents are the hierarchy and the children are dependent, because they'll say, for example, I have this after school and this after school and this after school. And if I'm the one doing the dishes, it's a lot of pressure because I haven't had a chance to decompress after school. So I hate doing the dishes. It makes me upset. And we're like, that's really important. So how about you do the bathrooms on the weekend and we'll let your brother do the dishes because he's here for 3 hours before we even eat. So that's just an example of something that was such a simple fix. Just flip it. So I think that you can still have the ability for everybody to feel like, everybody meaning children, to feel like they have a voice and that their voice matters and that it is being considered, but at the same time still maintain the fact that the teacher still runs the class and the parent is still the head of the household.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Excuse me.
I can really picture that example, what you're talking about with the ages of your children, Nikki, and the concept of like there's still authority and that there is hierarchy with adults and children. And from a brain science perspective, because I can't help but geek out on it. But if there are too many choices for children, if too much is available to them, then it creates insecurity and anxiety and overwhelm. Even though we know this, even though your toddler at the toddler age still wants everything that they want. And when they're older, they still, I'm 40. I still want everything I want. Right? So like that drive to want everything you want, it's not going to disappear just because you have authority and just because your kids are leaning on you. And then you get to say, like, I will consider, like there's politeness, there's respect there, there's listening, there's hearing. But then you do get to have authority, and that can be a tricky spot for all of us, in our families. I think of a kid example, the toddler from the Waldorf school, where it was parent-toddler time. And what the Waldorf teachers or guides will say is, I'm really big on it's time, because I've worked with kids who are concrete and kind of black and white thinkers. So I'll just be, yeah, it's time to put your shoes on. And they had a similar take on not saying, are you ready to put your shoes on? Like not giving an actual option there. And they use the you may. So I'm just thinking of an example for like the little kids and the big kids. Like we also exert authority or demonstrate authority by saying, you may put your shoes on. And then when there's a tantrum or some big feelings, there's listening involved, like that's a skill, so that they're heard. So just trying to give different examples, like, yeah, there gets to be authority, and it works when you're also considerate of your
Mhm.
child.
Mhm.
That sounds like my household. I want to go watch such and such on TV. It's time to clear the table. I'm going to take
At-
that one away. Thank you. I
Even
like
at
it's time.
2.5 years old, Mason will be like, first this, then that.
Yay.
Got it.
Got it. Yay. Well, I
Um,
think even a lot of what I do is at a university level. And even there, this applies so much to university students, a voice and choice and authority. And I do think that, I think it's really important, and I try to be as concrete about this as possible to say, I want to hear your concerns. I want to hear what you like, what you don't like. And then I can take those and I can decide if that's going to work for this class or not. And people are really good about that because they do feel heard. And 50% of the time I can change something slightly and it will help with people feeling better about something. So I think it's like across the board in a lot of ways.
I'm being mindful of time, and I just want to talk about chapter 7, the last chapter that we read, which is the flatlining of culture. So when a culture is healthy, traditions, values, things that are important from one generation gets passed down to the next generation. And when culture is unhealthy, like what this book is saying, that's when kids will form cliques, because they'll, have their special way of saying something, make up their own special words and phrases that adults don't understand. They may share interests in music or how they dress or things like that. But one of the things that Uzma and I had talked about was the fact that, and correct me if I'm wrong, Samantha, a child's brain does not mature to an adult brain until they're 26 or 27 years old. Is that correct?
Yeah. And even
Blows my mind.
into early 30s. Mm-hmm.
Blows my mind every single time. So this sense of universality where, things are supposed to be in a certain order and tradition and values and what they, what was taught to us by our elders, for those things to matter, they don't get it until their brain matures to an adult. So that's where, the transmission of culture and values from one generation to the next gets eroded. And it needs to be filled. Like there's a void that needs to be filled. And that's where, peers start to matter more than parents, when kids are trying to fill that void or that vacuum. So I thought that was important to mention from chapter 7.
Yeah, and that's a great point, Nikki. There was also a mention about like the loss of the parent orientation if the child does not have that extended family or community, that sense of culture, is that they don't build resilience, they don't build the self-esteem because the peers are not going to provide that. And part of that is what you were talking about. They're not, their brain is not matured, and this notion of, it takes a village. It reminded me of that, often quoted saying that that's kind of the hope, as I was reading part 2 and as we kind of wrap up, is there are some things we could do even now within our own community and circle to try to build some of that attachment, So to summarize, I guess I'm going to start wrapping up. We started this with a quote, "It is when we lack that power that we're likely resorting to force." And that our parenting becomes blunted when we rely on, children to make those choices and we're not being that guiding force. So anybody want to share any last minute takes, or we'll wrap up also with what to notice in the next couple of weeks?
One of the things that struck me was when we talk about, our instincts are being blunted and we're likely to resort to force, and force is not, it can be just yelling, right? Force in terms of, come on, do what I want you to do. I'm a visual person, and I visualize like I'm holding on tighter, right? And the tighter I hold is the more they want to go, the more that they don't want to be with me, right? And it kind of made me laugh because the title of the book is Hold On to Your Kids, and I'm like, but not that tight.
Yeah, and I think about the word power there, like have power over your children, or maybe over is the wrong word. But I think like, oh, okay. So I think what that word means, the way I translate that is influence. Like you have influence over your children. And then, I mean, you all know me as a parent and life coach. So you're like, well, yeah, I like leadership and vision and values and all of that. And kind of a random vision in my mind was thinking about family traditions over the holidays. And so I'm married and my family has a pretty weak end of the year holiday tradition, but it's been there for a long time. And my husband's family has a very strong end of year holiday transition. And so I had a conversation with my 4 siblings last year individually and was just like, so I'd like to beg out of our family tradition because what's happening over here is so strong and it's a 6-hour drive to get there. Like I would like to just have a conversation about being released from that family tradition because there's not strong values in it. And if we want to redesign that, we certainly can. I don't know why I'm saying that, but anyway, talking about like the
Well,
values.
I think it's
Oh,
the
I know.
draw.
It's the draw. So I was getting to the word influence, being a coach, and then leadership. So if we're influencing our kids, like holding on to your kids is learning how to be a leader. What is that like? Have conversations and influence people, or like Dale Carnegie and like all of these old names of big influencers. And that's what I'm hearing. Like there's attachment science and attachment theory plus like influence. How do you influence and be a leader for your family?
So that's interesting because one of the things that I took from this book was that attention commands stronger attachment relationships. So what does attention mean? And when our kids are behaving the way that we don't want them to, or kind of getting off course, maybe that's a time for self-reflection when we say, have I been giving them enough attention? Is that a call for attention rather than a behavior that I don't like? Right? So maybe look at you before you point your finger at your kid. So I actually think, maybe over the next couple of weeks while we read part 3, maybe we can pay attention to when our attachment is kind of not up to par. And number 1, what comes up in our kids when our attachment is kind of waning. And also for me, what happens to us emotionally as a parent? How do we respond when our kids respond to us, not giving them the attention that they need and deserve? So that's my challenge. I'm going to throw that one out for you guys. Pay attention to how your kids respond and pay attention to how you respond as a parent when your attachment is waning. And on that note, and almost right to the half hour, our next call will be on August the 13th, which is a Sunday at 11 a.m. Central. That's 12 noon Eastern. And remind me, Uzma, when is that Pacific?
9 a.m. Pacific.
9 a.m. Pacific. And part 3's title is Stuck in Immaturity, How Peer Orientation Stunts Healthy Development. And I think they've definitely been paving the road for that conversation. So chapters 8 to 13 sounds like a lot, but what we'll be discussing is talking about the flight from feeling, the making of bullies and victims, and taking a sexual turn. So I'm sure that next part 3's conversation will be very, very interesting. So thank you all for joining us today. Thank you, Uzma, Mark, and Samantha as well. And we will see you on August 13th.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.